in your current sort of ministry space, Gio?
Yeah, well, at least as technology is concerned, I'm very passionate about technology. I love technology. I'm a videographer by extension. I'm a passion for it. I love to take pictures, although I'm not good at taking pictures. I love to do it anyway. And so one of the things is technology, and I think in the past maybe 3 years or so has taken a shift completely. And of course, we have the discussions that we already know this, that has changed and it has become such an integral part of ministry now. In the United States of America, I think the propensity now, I don't know the figures right off the top of my head, but the church has now turned into a hybrid. So there are people now that are not going to a physical church as much anymore. It's a lot of online watching. It's a lot of things. So I'll just give you a quick example and experience. After being in a year in where I am now in Florida, it's a 600-member church, so it's a pretty big church. It's taken me a while to kind of get to know the faces and familiarize myself. There was one lady that came up to me, and she came up to me. She's like, "Hey, Pastor Gio," and I'm looking at her. I'm just like, "I'm sorry, I don't know you." And she says, "Well, I watch you online." And so it was already a familiarity that she had with
So she
with
feels
the
like
church.
she knows you.
Correct. And so she approached me as though, at first I had to look at my wife like, what's going on? but we're starting to find how important it is that ministry and technology forms an integral part of not only our day-to-day lives, but as far as ministry is concerned.
And what about over in the Adventist Media Center, Jesse? What are some ways that you're using AI in that space?
Yeah, well, for us, it felt like there was a switch that went off. We were suddenly not using any AI, and suddenly it exploded everywhere across all of our departments. So to give you some context, if you're not familiar, Adventist Media is made up of a bunch of different departments. So I'm in editorial and communications, and basically that means that we do PR for the church, we do promotions, we do the Adventist Record, we do Signs of the Times magazine, we maintain Pastor Glenn Townend's Facebook page, which is always very popular. But that's just one component of Adventist Media. We have marketing, we have production, we have Hope Channel. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on. And because we have so many different needs in our building, AI can be utilized in all sorts of different ways. So, to give you an example, our production department, which also works with marketing to produce audiobooks for Hope Books, one of the things that is a massive need for us is voice actors to come in and record audiobooks. And there's a bunch of other stuff. So we're doing devotionals at the moment. We're in the middle of production for that, doing devotionals for Adventist Heritage in October. Big Heritage Month sort of push. We're doing like 30 devotionals. The thing that we're exploring in that space is an AI tool called 11 Labs. It is a tool that basically takes your voice data and it translates it into an AI voice. So we can take Gio's voice, we can input about 30 or so minutes of him speaking, and it will use its tools to generate a text-to-speech sort of voice where we can make him say whatever we want. Now, it sounds kind of sinister, but we're hopefully being responsible at Adventist Media with all that sort of stuff. The thing that we're trying to do is use that to cut down our costs. But that's just one example.
Yeah.
I use a tool called Descript. It's another transcription tool which we put all of our podcasts and our live streams into. That allows us to take those live streams, interviews, podcasts, and turn them into articles that we can put on our websites as blog posts and things like that, because it transcribes everything.
Yeah.
Cut up for short videos for TikTok and Instagram. Yep. There are just so many things. Like, I could literally sit here for the next half an hour just telling you about all the things that we're doing.
There's even AI that creates images for you now, right?
That's correct. So if you've picked up a Record or a Signs magazine in the last year, chances are that one of them was the front cover would have been generated with AI. And if you've got an eye for it, you can kind of pick it out. If you go to the booth at the convention hall over this afternoon, there is a massive banner of Jesus that we have at our Adventist Media booth that was created with AI. So we're using a tool called Midjourney to generate those images. And it's not that it replaces stock images or illustrations, but it's a more cost-effective way of doing it. Now, obviously, there's a whole bunch of ethical things that we could talk about.
Which we'll get into. Yeah.
But for us, the main reason we're using Midjourney is for a pragmatic reason, and that's that stock images cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So if you flip open a magazine that has, pictures of licensed products, of celebrities, film, television, that was not released to the public as part of a press release, sometimes they can cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars just to license that image. There are some old, like, if you've seen some of those old paintings of like Jesus returning again, or Jesus with his disciples, or taking selfies, or with a little lamb or whatever. A lot of these images that are just really common can cost a lot of money. And so for us, it's very pragmatic. Would we prefer to spend $700 on an image or generate it for free?
Yeah.
That doesn't answer all of the ethical questions.
Yeah,
It
but
doesn't even touch on them, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into some of those ethical implications in a moment. But I mean, but from the sound of what you guys are saying, it sounds like you're very like pro AI. Like I suppose whenever there's been new technology that's come over the last century or so, there's generally two types of responses. There's the folk who are fully like against the new technology. They're fully against the new thing that's happening. And then there's other folk that are kind of uncritically embracing it. So there's this big spectrum and I'm just curious where you fellas would see yourselves sitting on that spectrum between fully against and fully for, or like, are you balanced? Like, how are you? Give us some insight.
Fair and balanced,
Of course, of course.
I know Gio has a lot of great thoughts on this, so I'll just quickly say this. Most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, our church is late to the party when it comes to new technologies. I know that you can all remember the pastors decrying the evils of social media and the smartphone and all that sort of stuff before COVID. And then as soon as COVID hits, they're all saying, please watch our live stream, please engage with us on social media.
Yeah.
We flip-flop like that when the needs arise. And so for us at Adventist Media, it's not that we're trying to be experts, but what we are trying to do is be as up-to-date as we can be, because our mission is to help you to be able to engage with these new technologies in the best way that you can. And so that's our mission, that's our MO, and that's the reason why we jumped on the bandwagon.
Yeah, got it.
Writ large.
Got it. But what's your insights
I think one of the
there?
things we need to be honest is, and just come to grips. We might not maybe agree with it. It might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I think as far as AI is concerned, it looks as though it's here to probably stay for a while, and it's going to be part of just what's done not only in entertainment and there's so many reasons. I was just listening to a tech talk last week on this, on the excitement that the education world has and what benefits it has that AI can do for the education process and learning and making it easier for kids and just education at large to help in that process. So, I don't think, just like anything, I think we need to not sort of be so harsh. There are concerns, yes, just like anything, but we cannot be, we cannot judge the use of something because of the misuse of something. We don't stop drinking water because some people use water to choke people or waterboard people. We need it. And in this essence, the technology as it is evolving and it's coming together, this one we really didn't have much, I would say, introduction to it. It was just like, boom, it's on your face and there it is. And so I think that's what the resistance has. And it's not just as far as church goes. I think a lot of people at large, and even some of the concerns, we were talking about this yesterday, some of the important CEOs that are running these companies of AI, some of them had questions and they said, you know what, I'm out, because they're just so uncomfortable with the ethical
Yeah.
portion of this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think it's here to stay. We have to
Yeah.
acknowledge that, number one. Number two is, and we cannot judge the use of something for the misuse of something. One of the parameters of technology we need to remember is that there is still a human element to this. And so the human factor of this, it's not infallible. It's not something that's, going to replace anything as far as what we do as far as human touch. And we're going to
Yeah,
we're going to
will.
talk about
We'll
this
get
a little
there.
bit more.
We'll get there.
But just, I think at least, to the very least, say, okay, maybe I won't participate in this, but we're going to have to start keeping an eye on it as far as the use and functionals that we just do in our day-to-day life.
And I think back to like our pioneers and how our church started, and they were big on the media of their day, which was the printing press, and using that to spread publications, gospel tracts, and so forth. And so I don't know, would it be a bit provocative for me to say that if it was, in today's age, if our church was getting started, would they be hopping onto the digital space and using that to propagate the gospel? I don't know.
And sorry to interrupt, but just imagine if the printing press had not been invented, if there was no innovation for that.
Yeah.
Where would we be? Where they even be a church?
Maybe no
would it just be a few-
Reformation?
I don't know.
I don't know.
So
Yeah, it's interesting. But okay, so so what? Let's have AI is this fantastic thing. Everyone's using it. All right, but hang on. So let's dig into a little bit now about some of the possible negative ramifications or concerns that people might have. And I'm thinking now, what impact is AI potentially going to have, do you think, on like the job market? Like you're saying that, hey, for all these pragmatic reasons, we're going to use AI because it's going to make it quicker to be able to, get text, speech to text. So that are there people going to be made redundant in their jobs, and what skills are going to be useful in the next 5 to 10 years in an AI-driven economy? Like, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. When it comes to all technological advancements throughout probably the last 200 years, we think of industrial revolution and onwards. The promise has always been that this next technological improvement is going to make your life easier, more efficient, better. You're going to have to spend less time working, because now we have this fancy, great new technology that's going to automate this process or whatever, okay? Unfortunately, and I'm not an economist, I'm not a historian, or anything like that, but from what I can see, most of the time, in the Western world at least, technological advancements have mostly served, in some ways, to make our lives better, but they've also served to enrich the 1% at the detriment of the working class. Now, this is not a political rally, so we can definitely debate that if you want to, but what we're seeing right now in America, for instance, with the Writers Guild strikes and the Actors Guild strikes and the negotiations or the non-negotiations that are happening with the major production companies, and most people don't realize that the reason that these strikes are still going on is because all of these massive companies, Paramount and Disney and all that, they're all part of a conglomerate group together. And so if one of the big players, aka like Disney or whatever, doesn't want to come to the table, then nobody can reach an agreement. And so these writers that are finding it more and more difficult to earn a living, these actors, surprise, surprise, most actors don't earn as much money as you think they earn. It's really quite sad that in an industry that is a huge moneymaker, that is absolutely dominant over our media consumption in the entire world, Hollywood is still prioritizing the needs of a few over the vast majority of writers and actors and producers. So what they're trying to do right now, a lot of these companies are trying to take the likenesses and the voice of prolific actors and voice actors and make AI. In fact, many of them have said, hey, we'll pay you X whatever person to develop a program, an algorithm that can help us to replicate the voice of Stephen Fry or, Angelina Jolie or whatever the case may be. That's really bad for most people. That's bad for creatives. It's bad for actors. It's bad for writers. but it's also bad for those of us who consume media and who enjoy media. And so when it comes to these sorts of things, it's no wonder that people are striking, because they want better conditions, they want better working conditions, they want better wages, but they also don't want their likenesses to be taken away from them. Can you imagine how like dehumanizing that must be, to be an actor working in Hollywood and to have your face and to have your voice appearing in a film and you not receiving anything for it because somebody owns your likeness? I cannot think of anything. Well, I can think of a few things that are worse, but being in that profession, horrific, absolutely horrific. And so bring it back to Adventist media, this is something that we have definitely been grappling with, because as much as we are using, like for instance, Midjourney to generate images, they're not our original IP. Midjourney is taking, it's searching the web. We're using a prompt, and it is referencing millions upon millions upon millions of images to create an amalgamation of what it thinks we want. We don't own any of those. We don't have the copyright for any of those, but we pay a subscription to Midjourney, and so therefore we own it. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
And what I'm hearing, Jesse, is that, I mean, in one sense, maybe there are some jobs that may sort of be made redundant, but on the other hand, the GPU and computing power that is necessary for AI thing, and if you think of the production line that's used to create like one GPU, you think of the minerals and the miners and the processing and all that type of thing. So there's still, it can't do away with humans just period, because you need humans to do that thing to actually get the GPUs and the processors and everything actually working. But there is a sense in which, oh my goodness, maybe there are some jobs that are and so maybe the question is more around like what controls, and this maybe we haven't caught up to this yet, but what controls do we use? I mean, you'd need to get some really good team of barristers together, I think, to kind of work out how this works, like with copyrights and all that type of thing. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Gio, around like, how can we control? Am I throwing you a...
No. I think there's still a human element to this. That to know that the people that are programming this sort of like learning machine and AI type of thing, that's there's still, and we were kind of discussing this, even though we could say it's maybe as objective as possible, there's still the human element that has programmed that has a certain bias. That is going to be projected, so it's not perfect, and we still are going to need to maybe veto. There's an article that I saw there on the ministerial department place on the NAD. They just did I think last week, they did an article on artificial intelligence. And what they ended up doing is that they got the book Steps to Christ, the Ellen G. White book, Steps to Christ, and they asked the AI to write a song about the book Steps to Christ. And they read through it, and most of it was pretty good, but then there's a portion of it that it was a typo, and it said that, we cannot leave the grasp of Satan's hand. And so it was a complete error on the part of the machine. So we need to, number one, be careful to fully become dependent on these things. Just like today, even if there was no sort of speak AI, we're really dependent on this. Most of us are kids or teenagers, so the human aspect in which you're saying, I think we still have to veto, make sure, obvious, try to, if the ethical part concerns us, well, I can control what I can control. And in the sense of, for example, of Adventist media and things of that sort, they can do the best they can with what they have. But therefore, what other people might be doing, what the use of it, it's tough. It's tough because it's uncharted territory that we're stepping into now. What that looks like, I don't know, because I could, they can make an image of me preaching somewhere. And
100%.
and I say, I've never been there. I never said that, but they're going to say, look, you're right there. You're on the screen. What do you mean you were
Looks
never
like
there?
you,
So,
sounds like you.
yeah, they could take my voice, they can take my affect, they can take my mannerisms, and it's scary. It's still scary.
Yeah.
But it's still yet to, to see
Yeah.
what really direction it's going to go. Are there going to be rules in place? Are there going to
Yeah.
be certain restrictions on certain programming that takes place for these AI giants and things that they're doing? I don't know.
If I could just add to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, go for it, go for it.
I think that the more as a society we embrace the digital, the more we're going to crave the physical. I think the more that we consume media that is artificial, the more we're going to crave what is authentic and real. And we saw this during COVID. You know, a lot of people during lockdown loved it, and other people's absolutely hated it, you know. And even if you loved being stuck at home alone, which, you know, my wife and I didn't hate it because our jobs involve being around people 24/7, and we're both introverts, and so it was like the world gave us a license to sit in our corner and be an introvert. But I know other people who absolutely just could not stand it, like they were bouncing off the walls. So even though we, you know, enjoyed most of lockdown, obviously it wasn't all, you know, roses, we still craved that physical contact with people. We were living in New Zealand at the time, and it was like 6 weeks, just like straight up, you know, we're all stuck inside for 6 weeks. And there were other lockdowns afterward. But for that initial 6 weeks, I was kind of like, oh yeah, whatever, she'll be right, I don't mind. But after that, I could not get to hang out with my friends and my family members fast enough. And I think that's true for as society progresses, and as we start to consume more and more media that is artificial, I think it's going to drive that hole in our hearts that's going to burrow it in to make us want the authentic and the real more. And I don't know if we're going to end up in a world where we're going to be going to see, you know, Mission Impossible 73 after Tom Cruise is long dead, and they're using an AI representative to make him jump off yet another building. But I do wonder if that's the world that we're headed into, if maybe that's the media we consume, but if it's going to drive us to want more real and authentic things. And I use Mission Impossible as an example because unlike the CGI fests of most modern Hollywood blockbusters, a lot of that is real.
I have a question. I also have a question that, as I'm listening to you, and maybe you can elaborate more on this, is the idea of creativity. And that's only really a human element that we can have. Just take a look at Hollywood. One of the questions now is they're coming up with so many sequels and remakes, and the comment across the board is always another one.
Yeah,
really,
another
so
one,
Hollywood is really can't come up with anything new.
Yeah.
So how much of that is gonna, you know, as you were saying, you know, with the Mission Impossible 73 or something that we're gonna have is you know, where do we draw the line? Because people are eventually, if that's the line, in my personal opinion, I'm going to tune it out really quick.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. I'm going to tune it out really quick, but I don't know what you guys have to say.
Well, the next kind of space I wanted to enter into, which sort of goes along with what you're saying, is, you know, the theological kind of implications of this. And, you know, when I think of humankind and the image of God and therefore creativity and a mandate to have dominion and to be fruitful and multiply, and all that rich theology we get of anthropology in Genesis, okay? When we now think of AI and we think of creativity and is this going to rob us of the imago Dei, or can an AI ever truly replace a human if we're thinking theologically? I don't know which one of you. I know you're both like theologians here. I don't know which one of you wants to go first. Yeah.
No, I you know, to that, the reason I asked that is precisely because I think no matter as much as there's advancements in technology, the truth is the Holy Spirit cannot be replaced. No matter how far along we are on technology, even if there's flying cars, even if Tesla comes out with whatever the case might be, you know, there's no replacing the power of the Holy Spirit, emotions, responses to spiritual, you know, situations or events or activities. I think that my knee-jerk reaction answer to that is no way. That cannot be replaced. However, the worry and I think the concern not just on my end, but everybody here would be, how much of that is going to go overboard. And so, I think they're, at least how I predict it, not that I'm a prophet, but that I predicted, I do think that there's going to be a sort of a wave of it, and then people are just going to say, wait a minute, we need the human element to this.
Yeah.
We need the human touch, the personal touch, the face-to-face, no matter, I tell you, I was in, during COVID, by 2021, I was all zoomed out.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do Zoom anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's only so much you crave and seek for the touch, the personal attention that you have.
Yeah.
I still don't think, and
Yeah.
and then theologically or spiritually speaking,
There's
we
no
can have the
substitute.
latest
Yeah.
and greatest, but you cannot replace.
It won't
Holy
substitute the
Spirit.
power of the Holy Spirit in our lives.
you can't. You just simply can't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you have anything to add? Any other thoughts around that, Jesse?
Really good thoughts. So the whole story of the Bible is about God wanting to be with his people. He creates the first man and the first woman, and he's with them in the garden, and then sin enters the world and there's brokenness, and we get to Moses and we get to Abraham and we get to the children of Israel out in the desert. And the whole reason that God instructs the people to build the tabernacle is so that he can dwell with them. And then we, of course, get the fulfillment of that. We have the temple and the second temple, and then Jesus comes, and John writes that amazing sort of riffing on Genesis of, God became flesh and he tabernacled among us. And that's, I think, presence is what God wants. And when we get to the end of Revelation, we don't all go to heaven. We do, but then we all come back to earth.
Yeah.
And God makes his presence permanently and fully among us. Now, the reason I mention presence is because I don't think that AI can replace the presence of God, as you've said, and also the presence of other humans.
Yeah.
There's a film that is either out in cinemas now or is about to come out in cinemas called The Creator. It's a sci-fi thriller that explores some of these ideas. We did a preview of it in the Science of the Times magazine, and it explores these ideas of, can robots become human?
Yeah.
What's the nature of the soul? What does it mean to be aware and to have awareness, to have self-awareness?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is, the doomsayers of AI point to this singularity, right? The point where AI becomes so self-aware that it becomes a thinking being. And I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I don't think it's ever going to happen. Most of the current research points to the fact that we will be able to probably replicate awareness and self-awareness, but we will never be able to create it, because as living conscious beings, we can understand biology and we can understand brain waves, but we cannot explain why we are aware, self-aware, and why we are conscious, whereas dogs and cats and bugs and spiders aren't.
Yeah. We can, as it were, form the dust of the ground, but we can never breathe the ruach in order to create a nefesh, in order for a living soul. That's what we can't do, right? It literally takes a miracle of God to create us.
There's a portion, not a portion, but the book of Revelation, I think would be key as far as for us understanding the end of the world and right before Jesus comes, and that tools are not really a factor within and that's what these are, right? These are tools, but the tools are not really a factor. It's the human heart that's on play when we are talking about the last day events and Jesus soon coming. So although technology, I do believe, will play a big part in all of this and how we go about, it's really, technology is a revelation of what is in the human heart. And so human, how would I say this? Human efforts only produce human results. And that's what they will continue to do, regardless of how it could be technology, it could be whatever human things are produced, it will always get us human results. But divine manifestations and therefore produce divine results. And so that's the element we're using. And Revelation points that out, that it's not going to be the tools, it's not going to be the things and the methods, it's going to be the human heart at the end of it all.
Sure. Well, gentlemen, if I can just if I can just take stock a bit and just kind of summarize the landscape we've traveled, like we've been dabbling with a bit of AI in our ministry context. There's a lot of potential, there's a lot of benefits, there's a lot of efficiencies and so on and so forth. But like all technologies, and I suppose in cooperation with our sinful natures, there can be a tendency to abuse, to steal, to destroy, all right? But I don't think AI is ever going to get to the point where it completely does away with humans. So, you know, we're on a theological level, we can't, it can't substitute the human soul, the living soul that God has created. So I just want to change gears to sort of try and half wrap this up, because I know you're also pastors as well, and I kind of want to look at some of the pastoral questions that are around this for folk who might be joining us online or here in the audience. And my first pastoral question is this: what advice would you give to individuals who are concerned about the impact of AI on their lives and communities? Okay, so we might have church members, we might have friends who are genuinely concerned about some of this stuff. All right, so what advice would you give them on how to navigate this space?
In my personal opinion, and this is maybe a really bad answer, but to me is if when we look at Scripture, we know that at the end, God is in control. It might sound a little bit cliche, it might sound a little bit like, brushing it off. But at the end of it all, God is going to be the one that has the last say. You know, there's many indications of how many things can be abused and how technology, but the problem is it's not the technology, it's the person that uses that technology. And so we need to make sure that yes, in my sense, I can be responsible with what I have and what God has given me and the abilities and the resources, such as tools like this, that I can be responsible with what I have and so forth. From there on, you know, just tread, you know, in a sense that, you know, we do what we can do. We place ourselves in availability for the Spirit to work in our hearts, and the rest will play out. And it's not going to look pretty. That's a for sure thing. That no matter what that outcome is, we know that right before the second coming of Christ, this is not going to get any better. This is going to get a little bit worse before it eventually does get better.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Jesse? And I'm talking more generally about just our community and our lives. We're going to talk more specifically about like our ministry praxis. That'll be my next question, but just more generally our lives, our communities, people that are concerned on that level.
Love Gio's thoughts. I would only add that if you're... I'll be very careful what I say here. The vast majority of us get our information from news, you know, mainstream media sources. And I will say that when it comes to a lot of these technologies, I've seen it on the 7 o'clock news. Oh my goodness, this new AI is replacing such and such, and it's going to do so. And a lot of it is just fear mongering. To be perfectly honest, when you scrape beneath the surface, as we've already discussed, AI is just a shadow. It's a digital shadow of what we can conceive of. It can do it more quickly. It can perhaps do it more efficiently, which is why it's so widespread. But at the end of the day, all AI is a reflection of what we can create and what we can conceive of. It can't do any more than that. And so whatever...
Sorry, it's basically data collecting.
That's all it is.
And if there's no more data to collect, then eventually it's just going to become obsolete.
And when you think about it that way, it becomes a lot less scary. Well, I don't know. I don't know. In a different way. Not in the sense that it's going to one day become self-aware and take over the world, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to where you get your sources from, I think it's really important that you temper that with some common sense and some wisdom.
Okay.
That's all I'd add.
So now more specifically, right? So, you know, Gio, for example, right at the start, you said there was a church member that approached you, said, "Hey, Pastor Gio," and you're like, "Who are you?" Like that's because they've been watching you online and there's been no face-to-face interaction. So now I'm thinking about the people who might be going, all right, thinking about our churches specifically and our ministry specifically, we've got some real concerns about, does this mean that our churches are going to be moving to these depersonalized, technological, over the screen type thing. People who have the concern, those type of concerns, what sort of pastoral advice would you give to them to help them kind of remain calm, to help them be a non-anxious kind of presence in our world today? Did you want to maybe start with sharing? I know I've hit Gio up a few times. I thought maybe we'll go to you first. Yeah.
It's only fair.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question. I think that AI can make our lives easier and it can make our lives better, but it can't replace the human connection. And look, I realize that we're in a post-COVID world, and I, as a pastor, recognize that there are certain people that have just not come back to church because they prefer to watch the live stream. And that's great. That's serving them in a specific way. But I don't think that it can replace human community. When we were in lockdowns, we had to make do with the technology that we had, and it allowed us to do things that we would not have been able to do had we not had that technology. And that's wonderful. But I think that as we progress in our world, if you're concerned about watching Pastor Gio say some crazy random things on a screen, you can just rock up to his church and see if that's what he's really saying, you know, if you live in his neighborhood. If you're concerned about what you're seeing online, and I'm concerned about a lot of things that I see online, the best place to do it is not on an online community, although it's, you know, some of those are great, but in local community with the people around you. That was the power of the first century church. The power was of people coming together in homes, breaking bread together, doing the Lord's Supper, serving their local communities. And as much as I am an apologist for media, it's my job to be, I also recognize that it's easy to get wrapped up in all of the latest technology that we forget what the heart is of it all. We're not just doing this to inflate our numbers, to make our ministry look good. We're doing this to reach people with the greatest story that was ever told, and communicating how much God is absolutely crazy about these people. And so that's got to be the heart of it.
Yeah, love that. Anything
We
to add?
cannot forget that this is a tool, and that's the key word. This is just a tool, and you know, in retrospect, looking back as I was listening, I think with COVID and technology, we really started to see the church be more creative in how it did church and programming and events and things of that sort. And so it's going to be, the challenge is the following. It's going to be, okay, how do we innovate and be creative with this and be relevant in speaking the language of the people and trying to reach people that otherwise we could not. Our churches now go outside of the four walls because anybody anywhere can see what your church is all about from any part of the world. And that's great. That's awesome. And at the end of it all, again, like I said, it's just a tool. That's going to be one challenge. And then the second challenge, as these technologies start becoming more integral in our day-to-day lives, then the challenge to us is, how do I therefore begin to have more personal, intimate interactions with people? Because I'm a big, I'm just like him. I don't get paid, but I'm just like him. To the technology and use it. I love it. I really do. But I have to remind myself at times, like, wait a minute, I have to go spend time with my kids. I have to go spend time with my wife. I have to go call a church member, visit somebody, and those things we can never. And so it's just a tool. And it's awesome to have now a new challenge to say, hey, this is a brand new thing. How is the church going to rise above this challenge now of having this new piece of technology? And how do we therefore continue to do personal ministries and have the personal touch that is still needed? I think we've been repeated that over and over again, that I don't think it'll ever go away until Jesus comes again. And even then, we'll still be in his presence. So that is key for us to keep in mind as a church moving forward, as just people that are interested in this, whatever our walk in life may be, to keep this in mind. This is just a tool, and just like any tool could be misused or abused, But at the end of the day, it's not the tool. It's the person. It's how I use it.
Yeah.
Could I,
What-
sorry. Just
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say, maybe Pastor David, or can we maybe get a roaming mic ready? Because in a moment, we're going to give you an opportunity to ask our panel any questions that you might have. So just so we can get that organised. But yeah, if you've got something you wanted to add on to
Yeah.
that, Jesse.
Just as an addendum, the fact that we are having this conversation in some ways is nothing short of a miracle. And the reason I say that, and this may not be a problem of any church in South Queensland Conference, but I can say in other parts of our division, just a few short years ago, trying to convince a local church to have a social media presence, to have a great website, or heaven forbid, a live stream was like pushing a boulder uphill for me in my local ministry, you know? And then suddenly COVID hits, and it's like a switch went off in people's minds of, if we don't get with the times, people, we're going to get left behind. We're not going to be able to reach people. And I was really scared at the end of COVID that we would take all of these amazing new tools and chuck them in the bin and say, well, COVID's over, dust our fingers off, we don't need them anymore. And that's happened in some places, but I am encouraged by the fact that innovation and creativity in the church has, at least in these past short few years, persisted in many parts of our church. And the fact that we can have this conversation now is pretty incredible.
And I mean, maybe a reflection just to close this segment before we get answer some of your questions. Maybe my reflection is maybe our response to this ought to be education. We need to educate ourselves what we're actually talking about. What are we actually dealing with? So gentlemen, any tips on how, as church members, we can educate ourselves around what's happening with AI?
Well, I think it's always a good idea to stay current with tech news. That's probably a good starting place for a lot of people. Polygon, The Verge, those sorts of websites tend to keep fairly up to date. I think it also depends on what your needs are in your local church or in your local ministry. If you have a need for transcription, then there's a lot of great tools out there for that. If you need a tool to help put together short form videos to help you reach more people on your social media platforms, there's tools for that. The limit is really, there are no limits. It feels like at the moment.
Sure.
I use it.
Just don't go into ChatGPT and ask AI about AI.
You know, that's the funny thing, because like when ChatGPT first started, it was like, wow, it's always accurate. It's always correct. This is amazing. And as time went on, and as ChatGPT starts referencing more data, it actually becomes worse. And I've seen instances where statistics and dates and ideas are just wrong. And if you tell ChatGPT it's wrong, it'll be like, no, I'm right.
Yeah.
And it just starts to remind me of some of my church members. No, sorry, I'm sorry. I'm not from here.
Yeah.
It's
But
okay.
I mean, but maybe like just a little bit on that
I think
thought.
we can end it there.
Maybe like a little benefit then is like, you know, ChatGPT is drawing from a spectrum of sources, right? Like sometimes with our own personal biases, we only want to read one particular author. We only want to listen to one particular preacher. But if we put some sort of question in ChatGPT, maybe one of the benefits is that it's going to give you an answer that's probably, I mean, yeah, notwithstanding some technical flaws, but notwithstanding that, maybe a pretty balanced answer, because it's saying, hey, well, you know, across the field, some people are saying this, others are saying that, because ChatGPT in itself probably doesn't have the human bias that we have. So maybe that's another benefit. That's a bit anecdotal, my thought there, but
I use I have a column in Science Magazine called Ask Pastor Jesse. Basically, if you find a Science Magazine, you'll see my ugly mug on the column there. You can write in any question. It's usually aimed at secular people, so if you have like a question along that line, feel free to send me a message or fill out the form and send me a question. The reason I bring it up though is because I wanted to do an experiment, and I got a question about you know, prayer life, spirituality, what we believe as Adventists, all that sort of thing. And I thought, I wonder if ChatGPT can answer this question for me. And so I entered the question in, and I did the prompt of, answer this question from the perspective of a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, make it pastoral, and make it, good to read for a secular person. And what it spat out was like 60% okay,
Yeah, right.
but it wasn't complete. And I wanted to see if, so in our magazine, just to give you a bit of a background, we do 3 passes of, we call it a read. So I'll send it to one of our other editors, and they'll make corrections and they'll suggest things to change. And we do that 3 times for our science magazine before it ever goes to publication. So we're pretty thorough. And every time that I sent it to one of our different editors, they always came back and said, that answer was a bit weird. Because it's not human.
Yeah.
When you read it, it kind of feels odd. So I ended up having to rewrite that. The core of the idea, so if you ever find a science magazine, see if you can find, there's one question that was answered with ChatGPT that I had to rewrite 2 or 3 times because it's just
didn't read right.
uncanny valley sort of thing.
Sure. Well, hey, I'm wondering if there's any questions anybody has because, I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you for your hand. We've got a few minutes, so if you'd just like to maybe introduce yourself with your name and then, we need the mic on at the front here, guys. Thank you.
Do you want to grab one of our mics?
All right. We're back in the game.
We have the technology.
We have the technology.
Long ago, about a year ago, when I got to the Revelation and talks about how Jesus coming back and learning about AI, it just made me wonder, is that how Satan's going to come and deceive us? Because it says in the Revelation that Satan's going to come as an angel with his angels. And they're going to say, he's here, he's there. Is that how it's possibly going to come?
Yeah, I think you were touching a little bit on that, Gio. Yeah, did you?
I think it's very plausible that it could somehow come in a form of a false second coming in that way. Yeah, sure. And it's up to us to really know and dive into Scripture to get to know what that second coming actually is going to look like. And so, those who are depending on their spirituality just on technology itself, which is great, but you can't fully just depend on technology to give you a spiritual answer. You have to go to the Word of God. There's a portion that you need to understand, or we all need to understand, rather, that the Word of God and diving in and prayer and meditating on the Word is essentially the only thing we're going to have left right before the second coming of Christ. So it's possible. Yeah, you said that, and I was like, whoa, that's very possible. Yeah.
Any other questions? We got another one over here. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. My name's Louis, but I'm a teacher, and obviously seeing a lot of these tools coming into education, and you're talking about seeing the functionality of these tools. I've dabbled a little bit with it in terms of trying to make marking efficient and stuff like that, and mark grading. We see kids' responses coming through that are AI generated, and like you say, they just have that weird kind of, you can pick it up straight away. But in terms of marking and stuff, and I think of this on a broader scale of grading the efficiency of someone or looking at people, as a teacher, I have that personal element with my students, right? I know my students, and all the grading that I've tried to do with AI has been totally, wrong. But we've often done this with data already, right? Like, we look at data sets of people and their performance and evaluating performance. How do we continue to find that balance of evaluation of people based on performance, which I think AI is going to have a huge engagement in versus that human element of understanding the person. And you know, God does this in his judgment of us, and I think we see this in the movies, right? When we look at the robots, you know, judging people in society and being the law, that's where people's minds kind of went, and God, you know, judges so differently. How do we continue to evaluate properly with that human element versus the data?
Yeah, got it. Do either of you guys have a thought on that?
Look, I think there are different parts of the world that, I don't think, we know that there are different parts of the world that do education differently. There are parts of the world that emphasize just, you know, rote learning, right or wrong, got to pass the grade. It's so important. But as you say, the human element can often get lost in that. I think we're really lucky here in Australia because of that different approach to learning of the human element, and I think that's really, really important. Obviously, depending on how big your classroom is, means more time you can dedicate toward individual students and their individual needs. My wife's a primary school teacher, so yeah, I totally get that. I think when it comes to education though, we have to really finally skate the line between the information that is readily available versus being able to interpret it. So, you know, in some senses, because of the vast amounts of information that we have at our disposal, there's so much that we don't really necessarily need to learn, like in a rote learning sense, because it's just available. However, what that takes away from us is the ability of what education really is about, which is about interpreting data, it's about interpreting life and being able to respond to it in a reasonable, mature way. And I think that is definitely what's so lost, what's becoming more lost. I was speaking with an accountant the other day, and we were just talking about, like, you know, accountants are either like the most interesting people in the world or like the most boring people in the world. There's no sort of like middle ground. I wasn't making that assertion. A friend of mine who shall remain nameless was making that assertion. And he was saying, yeah, it's actually true, because like when you go to a job for that sort of thing, for that sort of thing, what they're looking for is not necessarily can you do the job well, it's can you work with people? Can you relate to people?
Yeah.
AI is not going to do that for you. It's absolutely not. So yeah.
Big time. Gio, you had a couple of thoughts?
Yeah, I think in a very practical, very simplistic sense, what I could say is we need to be able to disconnect from time to time to be able to tell the difference. When especially in educational sense, you know, there's some good, ChatGPT comes up with some good articles and stuff, and you're like looking at it was great. But I think we need to also learn how to disconnect and synchronize our minds to different things. Was just having a conversation with somebody in the audience before this presentation of how much we've lost contact with nature. Just because we're so connected, we're in boxes, we drive in boxes, we live in boxes, we work in boxes, and we've just lost touch with nature. And the conversation came about because of just how much technology has taken over, that our minds are simply just synchronized to other things, and sometimes we can't even tell the difference. So I think it's going to go a long way. In a practical, very simplistic sense, is that from time to time, we're going to have to learn how to disconnect and just put it aside, and just so that when we can come up and we see these things, we can tell the difference. And that's how I see it. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't envy your job as an educator, but maybe we need to move away from like written essays and more towards oral presentations. Like, hey, rather than give me a 2,000 word essay on Julius Caesar, come give me a 10-minute oral presentation. And maybe that's actually going to move society in a direction where we're better at face-to-face. Like, funnily enough, this whole thing does a complete 180, and we actually get better at face-to-face communication, because that's how we have to examine ourselves and test ourselves, because that's how we could be authentic. And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. We'll have to see. Time will tell.
I don't know about your university experiences, but I have very distinct memories of studying my butt off for an exam, going to the exam, putting all the information on the page, and then whoop, right out of my brain as soon as I walk out of the exam hall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe that's a me problem. I don't know.
All right. Were there any other questions? If not, okay. We might have to, Pastor David, just at the front here. I'm just looking at our time as well. We might have to make this our last question. as well.
Yeah, that's a shame. There's so many rabbit holes.
Yeah, indeed.
Lawrence Krauss, he's like the American version of Richard Dawkins. A panel of Arizona State University just over 10 years ago said about what happens if AI takes over humanity and wipes them out. He said that's not a bad thing. And that scared me, that someone would, of that stature, that influence, would say something so silly like that. And I suspect it might have to do with his definition of free will. Jesse touched on this using different words earlier, the topic of free will in AI. Just wondering if you can talk about how we can define free will, because atheists define it as random will, and I think we need to define it differently.
Awesome. Just a nice, lighthearted, deep theological question. Yeah, I reckon this has got your name written all over it, Jesse.
Oh, yeah, well. Free will, I mean, it's such a core thing as Adventists. You know, we believe in this so much. We believe that, you know, that we have a God who loved us so much that he gives us the choice whether to love him back or not. And I think free will is about vulnerability. It's about putting yourself in the position of somebody who can be hurt and hurt deeply. And that's what Jesus does on the cross. He says, you know what? I'm going to die for you even if you decide never to pledge yourself to me. And when it comes to AI, and I mean, some proponents believe that AI would be the next step in human evolution, right? A humanist might say that. And that if AI takes over and we all get hooked up to the singularity and we transcend our existence, then that would be a great thing. There's a certain similar emphasis on space travel at the moment. You know, we want to colonize Mars and we want to colonize the moon. We want to do all these things. We want to get out of our environment because we've screwed up our environment so much. The world has been devastated by mega corporations, you know, extracting resources at the cost of native wildlife and native peoples and the environment, global warming and all that sort of stuff. It's like a huge, huge cocktail of disaster just waiting for us. And so the instinct is to say, well, let's escape all of that by going somewhere else, whether it be to Mars, whether it be to the singularity, to be hooked up to a computer and live our lives in Mark Zuckerberg's, metaverse for the rest of our lives, a Ready Player One sort of situation. But when I read my Bible, I read of a God who is in the business of restoring the world and who is in the business of restoring people. And as we've already touched on, the end of the story of the Bible in Revelation is God making all things new, us and our environment.
Yeah.
And we can choose whether we want to be part of that new creation right here, right now, or if we want to reject that.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a far better option to join God's cause of bringing about new creation, even if we can't see the event horizon quite yet, but we still have to hope and pray.
And I think as well, Jesse, that we're living in an age where Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, all those hardcore anti-theists of the 2000s, it's actually a bit of a dying breed. Like, people have realized that that brand of atheism doesn't work anymore.
To actually go to its full conclusion is a deeply depressing and distressing thing.
And people are... Yeah. Mike. Yeah.
I said it's a denial of self completely once you just keep following that.
And people are
that
realizing
logic.
that brand of atheism doesn't work. And there's actually a thing now called like the post-atheist movement. There's a guy called Justin Brierley who's just released a new book on that, and I'd recommend you have a read of it because he's just basically saying that, like, just ignore Richard Dawkins. Like, but seriously, like, he's actually losing traction now. People are realizing his brand of atheism doesn't work.
It doesn't.
Yeah. And so, we can't. I suppose what I'm saying is, don't let him dictate what the temperature of our culture is, because he's a bit antiquated, outdated now.
Yeah, the new atheists really gained traction because they struck in on a market that was so over Christianity and so over the church and the abuses of the church and the hypocrisy of the church. But what they have to offer, the alternative, is actually far worse. And as you've said, people have started to realize that even if you even if you cognitively assent to what they're saying, the reality is nobody can actually live that way.
Yeah.
In fact, I would go as far to say that Dawkins probably can't live that
No,
way
no,
if
yeah.
he was really honest.
Yeah, yeah. Well, folks, I think that's brought us to the end of our time here now. We've had a good chat. I think we've had a good chat. I've learnt a few things. And I hope you have all been able to learn something and kind of be able to enter into this conversation now. And I suppose to go back to your churches to continue the conversation in your boards and in your meetings, in your ministries, so that as a church we can kind of be utilizing this in a healthy, responsible, and be stewarding it, which is ultimately what it means to be a human, is to steward the things that God's given us, right? And so, yes, I hope that's been empowering for you. But let's just close our workshop this morning right now with a word of prayer. Loving Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the time we've been able to spend here in this tent as a church, talking about society and culture and the changes, and often it's easy to be anxious and to be fearful, but you've told us constantly to not fear, because you have overcome the world, because you are with us even to the end of the age. And I just pray we would be a non-anxious presence in this rapidly changing world, that we would be able to be a voice of clarity, a voice of calmness, that we wouldn't be ignorant of these things, that we would educate ourselves, and that we would be led by your Spirit to be faithful stewards in this world, to bring you glory. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. So good seeing you all here, and we'll be back again tonight at 7 p.m. to continue to hear about living in the miraculous with my friend, Pastor Gio. Thank you all.